Motivational interviewing is an interpersonal helping technique that was developed by William Miller. William Miller is a professor of psychology and psychiatry at the University of New Mexico and is also affiliated with the Center on Alcoholism, Substance Abuse, and Addiction. I'd like to tell you a little interesting story, at least I think it's interesting, about how motivational interviewing as a theory got developed. Early in his career, William Miller, for his research at the university, sought out to do research on why substance abuse treatment doesn't work. However, when he got back the results from his research, what he actually found was what components of substance abuse treatment actually do work. He took that information from that research and developed it into the ideas that are behind motivational interviewing. So we actually can say that motivational interviewing was accidentally found by Dr. Miller. I'd like to start today's training with a little self-examination exercise. And the question I want each of you to ask yourselves is to consider something about yourself that you would like to change. You feel like, or you recognize a desire to change. You recognize a need to change. You've told yourself this is something you should change. And you've probably spent some time recently thinking about changing. But in spite of all of those efforts, you haven't changed whatever it is you're thinking about yet. The key question to ask at this point of realizing that there is something you'd like to change but you haven't changed is to ask yourself the question, what has prevented you from making this change? Would like you to take just a second and think about that. Okay, let's take that experience and apply it to the work that we're doing. The reality is we are asking the persons with whom we work to make some kind of change. It's what behavioral health intervention is all about, is making some kind of a change. The motivational interviewing strategies guide us to look at these things that are presented on this slide. What is it that people want to change? What is it that people want to change but they haven't changed? And what stands in their way? What has prevented them from making the change? What are the roadblocks to making that change? Motivational interviewing is defined as a collaborative, person-centered, directive method for addressing the common problem of ambivalence or uncertainty about behavior change. It is designed to strengthen personal motivation for and commitment to a specific goal by eliciting and exploring the person's own reasons for change within an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. Motivational interviewing recognizes and accepts the fact that clients who need to make changes in their lives vary in their readiness to change their behavior. While some people are ready to start taking action to change their situation, others are more ambivalent, or in some cases, don't even see the need for change. Therefore, motivational interviewing involves collaboration rather than confrontation. Evocation, allowing space for the client to articulate their own goals rather than education, autonomy rather than authority, and exploration rather than explanation. By providing a safe space for the clients to explore the possibility of change, clients are able to identify places where they would like things to be different in their life and set goals that they feel are important. The primary goals of motivational interviewing are listed here on this slide. First, we want to work to reduce and minimize resistance. I'm going to talk about what resistance is more in just a minute, but at this point what I would like to say is we need to recognize and then avoid any type of power struggle with the individual with whom we're working. If we start to hear yes, but, then we know that we're encountering resistance and we need to change our style. The second goal is to explore the discrepancy between the individual's behavior and their values, goals, and eventually for the client to resolve their ambivalence about change. In exploring discrepancy, we need to explore what is important to the client, what they value, and then look at how their actions affect those values. Do the person's actions help them fulfill their values, or are their actions in conflict with their values? Eventually, through looking at this possible conflict, the client resolves the discrepancy by a commitment to a specific course of action, thereby resolving their ambivalence. And finally, the goal is to elicit change talk. Perhaps more than any other style of working with clients, motivational interviewing focuses the discussion on change. What do you want to change? What have you tried? What doesn't work? Why do you want to change? All of these move the discussion specifically into what is called change talk. The resolution of this change talk should be some level of commitment by the client to some kind of behavior change. I love this picture of resistance. Probably most of us have had the experience of playing tug-of-war with a dog. We've probably noticed that the harder we pull, the harder the dog pulls in the other direction. That, in essence, is resistance. Resistance is a legitimate concern for the practitioner because it predicts poor treatment outcomes and lack of involvement by the client in the therapeutic process. One view of resistance is that the client is behaving defiantly. Another, perhaps more constructive view, is that the resistance is a signal that the client views the situation differently than you do. This requires us to understand our client's perspective and proceed from there. Resistance is a signal to you to change directions or to listen more carefully. Resistance actually offers you an opportunity to respond in a new and perhaps surprising way and to take advantage of this situation without being confrontational. Adjusting to resistance is similar to avoiding argument in that it offers another chance to express empathy by remaining non-judgmental and respectful, encouraging the client to talk and to stay involved. Try to avoid evoking resistance whenever possible and divert or deflect the energy that the client is investing in resistance toward a positive change. And we also talk about ambivalence. Feelings of ambivalence about change are natural, regardless of one's readiness to change. If you remember the short exercise where we started today, you can recognize ambivalence about change within yourself. If ambivalence is in fact a natural part of the change process, it's important to understand and accept ambivalence in the persons we're working with. Ambivalence is often the central problem, and a lack of motivation often results from this ambivalence. If we interpret ambivalence as resistance, then we are likely to experience increasing conflict with the client, which leads to outright resistance. Miller and Rolnick identify 4 types of client resistance. First, there's arguing. where the client contests the accuracy, the expertise, or the integrity of the practitioner. They can challenge the accuracy of what we say. They can discount with where they question our personal authority or our expertise. And sometimes they can express direct hostility toward us. The second type of resistance is interrupting, where the client breaks in and interrupts us in a defensive manner. They can do that by talking over us, where they speak while we're still speaking, without waiting for an appropriate pause or silence. Or they can cut us off. The client breaks in with words that are obviously intended to cut off the discussion. The third type of resistance is denying, where the client expresses an unwillingness to recognize problems, an unwillingness to cooperate or to accept responsibility, or to take suggestions. The client might blame other people for their problems. The client may disagree with a suggestion that we've made, but offering no constructive alternative. This includes the familiar yes, but, which explains what is wrong with a suggestion that we may be making. The client may make excuses for his or her behavior, or minimize the risk or the impact that their behaviors have on themselves. The client may make statements about himself or others that are pessimistic, defeatist, or negative in tone. They may express a reluctance or reservations about their plans for change or any suggestions that may be given. And finally, denying manifests itself in an outright expression of a lack of desire or an unwillingness to change. And fourth and finally, the client shows evidence of ignoring or not following us. That can be through inattention, where they just don't pay attention. It can be where they refuse to answer us, either with a response that isn't an answer, or no verbal response whatsoever. Or ignoring can also involve sidetracking, where the client changes the direction of the conversation to an area that usually isn't relevant to the conversation. With motivational interviewing's focus on change, we need to stop a moment and just think about change in general. And any time I can quote Nietzsche is a good time to pause. Change is a process. It doesn't occur overnight. The reason that most New Year's resolutions fail is that they are spur-of-the-moment decisions that have not used the process of change. Lasting change may take as much as a year to be fully embraced. It is easy to get stuck in the early stages of the process of change, where we are trying to decide if we want to change or not. We talked a little earlier about ambivalence, and this sense of being torn can freeze us in inaction. And finally, no one can push someone to change. Each person must make his or her own decision and commitment to change. Pushing someone to change will likely lead to resistance and entrenchment in the current behavior. It is vital to distinguish between the spirit of motivational interviewing and the techniques that motivational interviewing recommends to manifest that spirit. Practitioners who become too focused on matters of technique can lose sight of the spirit and style that are central to the approach. There are as many variations in technique as there are encounters with clients. The spirit of this method, however, is more enduring and can be characterized in a few key points. First, motivation to change is elicited from the client and not imposed from without. Other motivational approaches have emphasized coercion, persuasion, confrontation, and the use of external contingencies such as the threatened loss of a job or family. Such strategies may have their place in evoking change, but they are quite different in spirit from motivational interviewing, which relies upon identifying and mobilizing the client's intrinsic values and goals to stimulate behavior change. Number 2, it is the client's task, not the counselor's, to articulate and resolve his or her ambivalence. Ambivalence takes the form of a conflict between two courses of action, each of which has perceived benefits and costs associated with it. Many clients have never had the opportunity of expressing the often confusing, contradictory, and uniquely personal elements of this conflict. For example, if I stop smoking, I will feel better about myself, but I may also put on weight, which will make me feel unhappy and unattractive. The counselor's task is to facilitate expression of both sides of the ambivalence impasse and guide the client toward an acceptable resolution that triggers change. Number 3, direct persuasion is not an effective method for resolving ambivalence. It is tempting to try to be helpful by persuading the client of the urgency of the problem and about the benefits of change. It is fairly clear, however, that these tactics generally increase client resistance and diminish the probability of change. Number 4, the counseling style is generally a quiet and eliciting one. Direct persuasion, aggressive confrontation, and argumentation are the conceptual opposite of motivational interviewing and are explicitly proscribed in this approach. To a practitioner accustomed to confronting and giving advice, motivational interviewing can appear to be a hopelessly slow and passive process. The proof is in the outcome. More aggressive strategies, sometimes guided by a desire to confront client denial, easily slip into pushing clients to make changes for which they're not ready. Number 5, the counselor is directive in helping the client to examine and resolve ambivalence. Motivational interviewing involves no training of clients in coping skills, although the two approaches are not incompatible. The operational assumption in motivational interviewing is that ambivalence or lack of resolve is the principal obstacle to be overcome in triggering change. Once that has been accomplished, there may or may not be a need for further interventions such as skill training. The specific strategies of motivational interviewing are designed to elicit, clarify, and resolve ambivalence in a client-centered and respectful counseling atmosphere. Number 6, readiness to change is not a client trait, but a fluctuating product of interpersonal interaction. The practitioner is therefore highly attentive and responsive to the client's motivational signs. Resistance and denial are not seen as client traits, but feedback regarding therapist behavior. Client resistance is often a signal that the counselor is assuming greater readiness to change than is the case. And it is a cue that the practitioner needs to modify motivational strategies. And finally, the therapeutic relationship is more like a partnership or companionship than expert-recipient roles. The practitioner respects the client's autonomy and freedom of choice, along with consequences, regarding his or her own behavior. Using motivational interviewing, case managers provide low-key feedback, roll with resistance, and use a supportive, warm, non-judgmental, collaborative approach. There are 4 principles that paint the big picture of motivational interviewing and underlie all aspects of this approach. First, express empathy. Empathy has been called the defining principle of motivational interviewing. The Webster definition of empathy is the capacity for participation in another's feelings or ideas. Another way to think about empathy comes from Carl Rogers, who suggested empathy means acceptance and understanding another person's perspectives and feelings neutrally, without judging or evaluating in any way. Neutrality is key because acceptance does not necessarily mean approval or agreement. Generally, the word listening is associated with empathy because without effective listening to another, we cannot have empathy for them. One of the first tasks of the case manager is to understand the client's dilemma or ambivalence about change. This expression of empathy involves active listening and understanding from another person's perspective. Number 2, develop discrepancy. Developing discrepancy is where motivational interviewing departs from a client-centered or humanistic approach because it is specifically directive. In motivational interviewing, case managers work to develop discrepancy between the way things currently are and the way a person would like things to be. By developing the discrepancy between the way things are and the way a person wants them to be, the case manager is helping them get unstuck. The intent is by building discrepancy, the person will be motivated to make changes in his or her life. The most effective way to develop discrepancy is for the client to talk about their reason for change. Eliciting these statements increases motivation for change and decreases uncertainty about change. One common strategy used in motivational interviewing to develop discrepancy is the pros and cons activity, in which the pros and cons of current behavior and the pros and cons of changing are listed by the client. Number 3, roll with resistance or reflecting discord. Resistance is defined as refusal to accept something new or different, or an effort made to stop or fight against someone or something. When a case manager argues with a client for change, the client is likely to argue against what the case manager is suggesting. This is often referred to as resistance. In motivational interviewing, resistance is thought of as a signal or red light to do something else. When the client sounds uninterested, unmotivated, or oppositional, the case manager rolls with it. Rolling simply means getting out of the way of the resistance and not engaging in it. Psychological judo is a metaphor from Jay Haley in strategic family therapy that is frequently used to illustrate this principle. In the martial art of judo, an attack by another is not met with direct opposition, but rather by using the attacker's momentum to one's own advantage. Instead of fighting against the attacker, one rolls with the other's momentum or energy and, in effect, gets out of harm's way as resistance is reduced. And finally, number 4, support self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is a person's belief in their ability to carry out a specific behavior. It is similar to confidence, but more specific and tied to a particular activity or behavior. If one feels that making a change is very important, but has no idea how to go about making the change, one's low self-efficacy for making the change is likely to jeopardize the change attempt. In motivational interviewing, the case manager encourages a realistic belief that change is possible. One way to assess self-efficacy is by using the readiness for change ruler. Instead of asking clients how ready they are to make a change, ask how confident and committed they are on a scale of 1 to 10 to make the specific change, or how important the change is on a scale of 1 to 10. The supporting part of this principle refers to the power of expectation. When a case manager believes in the client and is able to convey this, the client is likely to have more belief in their ability to make changes in their life. Another strategy for enhancing self-efficacy is to explore past successes. The case manager can encourage the client to apply what worked in the past to the current situation. The practice of motivational interviewing involves skillfully using techniques to guide the process and conversation in a way that elicits change talk and increases the client's confidence in their ability to change and their commitment to change. OARS is a simple way to remember the basic approach. Open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries are core strategies used to move the process forward by establishing a therapeutic alliance and eliciting discussions about change. Open-ended questions are those that are not easily answered with yes or no, or a short answer containing limited information. Open-ended questions invite elaboration and thinking more deeply about a topic. These questions create motivation and momentum that help a person consider more fully the possibility of change. Some examples of open-ended questions that would be used in motivational interviewing would be, what types of things would you like to talk about? Or, how did you first get started drinking? What would change if you started working? Or, how do you think your nutrition is related to the health problems you talk about? Some examples of closed-ended questions that are not appropriate in motivational interviewing would be questions such as, don't you think your family has been hurt enough by your drug use? Or isn't your friend's idea that you should get a job really a good one? Or have you ever thought about taking the stairs instead of waiting in frustration for an elevator to take you up 3 floors? The difficulty or the problem with these closed-ended questions is they are very easily answered yes or no, and then the individual does not continue to talk about him or herself. Affirmations are statements that recognize the strengths of the client. They help to build relationship between the case manager and the client and help the client see themselves in a more positive way. It is important for affirmations to be genuine and consistent. Affirmations can encourage clients when previous efforts at change have been unsuccessful and can reframe behaviors as signs of a positive quality rather than a negative one. Some examples of affirmation. I appreciate your honesty. I can see that caring for your children is important to you. It shows your commitment when you come back to case management meetings, or you have good ideas. Reflections or reflective listening are one of the most crucial skills in motivational interviewing. First, reflections are used to express empathy or understanding what another person is experiencing. When the case manager carefully listens and responds in a reflective manner, the client comes to feel that the person understands the issues from their perspective. In addition, reflective listening is a key intervention that can be used to guide the client towards change. When used in this way, reflections can guide the client toward resolving uncertainty about change by focusing on the negative aspects of staying the same and the positive aspects of making a change. There are several levels of reflection ranging from simple to more complex. Different types of reflections can be used as clients demonstrate different levels of readiness for change. There are 4 levels of reflective statements, and we're going to talk about those next. Finally, summaries are a special type of reflection where the case manager recaps all or part of a meeting with the individual. Summaries communicate interest and understanding of the client's situation and perspectives. Summaries can also be used to call attention to important points made during the meeting. Summaries can highlight both sides of a client's uncertainty about change. Additionally, they can be used to develop discrepancy by intentionally selecting information to recap that highlights the difference between how things are in the present and how the client wants things to be in the future. It is important for case managers to remember to stay in the position of eliciting change talk from the client. This may involve asking questions about how they want to go about changing, where they want to start, what that would look like for them, what barriers exist, and how they might address those barriers. An example of a summary might be, "So Sally, let me make sure I've got this right. You care about your children very much, and you don't want to chance having social services intervene. You believe you need to change your living situation so that it's more stable, and aren't quite sure how to do that. Is that right?" As we said previously, there are 4 levels of reflective statements. The first of those is repeating. This is the most basic level and is simply repeating what someone has said. Repeating indicates that you accurately heard what the other person said. Rephrasing is the second level, and in rephrasing, you would rephrase what the person has said with a few word substitution that slightly changes the emphasis. The key here is we use rephrasing to move the client more toward a commitment to change or change talk, or to highlight the discrepancy by changing the emphasis of their statement. The third level of reflection is paraphrasing. In paraphrasing, you restructure what the person has said in a significant way. It involves you as the listener inferring the meaning of what was stated and stating that back to the listener. Where the client may say, "I'm really not sure I can make this change." If you really are going to paraphrase the meaning, you might reflect back, "I hear that you're really struggling with your confidence and your belief in your ability to make the change." And finally, reflecting feeling. Reflecting feeling achieves the deepest level of reflection because you are not reflecting on content as much as the emotion underneath what the person is saying. So the client may say, "I can't do this." And if you really wanted to reflect the emotion underneath that, you would reflect either the person's frustration or perhaps disappointment that they are actually struggling with making the change. Change talk is defined as statements by the client that demonstrate consideration of, motivation for, or commitment to change. In motivational interviewing, the case manager listens for expressions of importance, confidence, and readiness or commitment to change. When these expressions are heard, the case manager guides the client to elaborate on the expression of change talk as a pathway to change. This process is called eliciting change talk. This technique differs from ORS because it is more directive. Using ORS will keep you afloat and may help you steer toward the client's goals. Eliciting change talk is a strategy that helps to establish and resolve ambivalence and move forward. Research shows that the more someone talks about change, the more likely they are to change. Different types of change talk can be described using the mnemonic "darn cat." I'm sorry for all the kitties out there, We're going to talk about darn first. The D in darn refers to desire statements, statements that express the individual's desire to change. I'd like to quit drinking if I could. I'd like to find a job. I wish I could make ends meet each month. These express the person's desire, but not necessarily any intent or commitment. A are ability statements. Ability statements refer to I can change. They speak to the client's self-efficacy or belief in the ability to make a change. I think I could do that. That might be possible. If I had someone to help me, I could probably finish my resume. These express the client's confidence. It may be weak at first, but if we continue to mirror the client's ability statements, that confidence begins to strengthen. R are the reason statements. The reason statements express why it's important to change. The reason statements reflect the client's reason for considering a change. If I had a job, I'd have more money. I don't like my kids to see me like this. My family would be healthier if I learned how to cook healthy foods. The reason statements begin to tip the balance in the pros and cons between the existing behavior and the new behavior as the person begins to emphasize all of the reasons for changing their behavior and adopting the new behavior. And finally, the N is need statements. I should change. Need statements indicate what the person believes as their need for change. They can be similar to reason statements, but the reason may be more emotional than cognitive. The need statements are very much a thinking, cognitive process. I will end up homeless if I don't find work soon. Life would be a lot less overwhelming if I addressed my depression. I will die if I keep using like this. Many people express a need or a wish for change, and it stays in the realm of I should do something. But the individual does not actually begin to commit to change until they are able to change the I should to I can, and then finally to I will. The darn statements are important to recognize and then emphasize through reflecting or directing the client to further elaboration. These statements play a significant role in helping the client to express commitment to change, and then focusing on change talk, and then increasing their level of commitment or readiness to take steps toward a behavior change. The CAT part of the darn CAT mnemonic refers to commitment to change, activation, and taking steps. With the C, the commitment to change, the person is expressing statements that say, I will make a change. These statements express commitment or intention to engage in behaviors that will result in change, such as, I will attend a job training class, or I'm planning to apply for a job next week. Activation refers to the person's readiness, preparedness, or willingness to make a change. A stronger commitment to change in which the person is ready and willing to take action. For example, let's make a plan for how I can further my education. When I get home, I'm going to get rid of all of the unhealthy food in my house. And finally, the T, taking steps, indicates the person is actually taking specific actions to change. The client has actually taken a step toward the change they desire. They've switched from considering a change to taking steps to make their situation different, such as, yesterday I applied for a job at the grocery store. I registered for a GED program so I can further my education. Or I met with a counselor for the first time last week. Eliciting change talk is a key component of motivational interviewing. The case manager must ask questions and interact with a client in such a way as to elicit or draw out change talk. A number of strategies can be used to foster this type of dialogue. We're going to discuss 10 of them specifically. Number 1, ask open-ended questions. We've discussed that previously. Asking open-ended questions helps the client talk about the changes that they want to make in their life, such as, it sounds like you're really considering a change. Tell me more about what you're thinking. Invites the client to tell his or her story. Number 2, explore decisional balance. First, ask for the good things about not changing, then ask for the not so good things. Then ask for the good things about changing and the not so good things. The pros and cons worksheet can be used as a tool for this. So you might say, what are the good things about what you're currently doing? What are the benefits to you of stopping what you're currently doing? Number 3, ask for elaboration. When a change talk theme emerges, ask the client to talk in more detail. So you might say things like, in what ways? Tell me more. What does that look like for you? Number 4, ask for examples. When a change talk theme emerges, ask for the specific examples. The use of specific examples makes the ideas very concrete for the client. So you might use things such as, when was the last time that happened? Tell me about that. Give me a specific example. What else has happened to you that is similar to this? And finally, number 5, look back. Ask about a time before the current concerns that the person is having emerged, such as, how were things better or different before you began to struggle with this? Continuing to talk about techniques for eliciting change talk, we look at number 6, look forward. Ask what may happen if things continue as they are, and ask what may happen if the individual changes. Motivational interviewing talks about the miracle question. And that miracle question is, if you were 100% successful in making the changes that you want, what would be different in your life? How would you like your life to be different 5 years from now? Number 7, ask about the extremes. Consider the extreme consequence of changing or not changing, such as, what are the worst things that might happen if you don't make this change? Or what are the best things that might happen if you do make the change? Number 8, use change rulers. You use a change ruler to assess the importance and confidence, such as on a scale from 1 to 10, how important is it for you to make this change? Where 1 is not at all important and 10 is extremely important. And then follow that up with, what might happen that could move you from a 3 to a 5? Number 9, explore goals and values. Ask about the person's guiding values and goals to heighten the internal conflict or increase the awareness of discrepancy, such as, what do you want in your life? Does this specific behavior help you accomplish your goals or values, or does it interfere with accomplishing them? And finally, number 10, come alongside. Explicitly come alongside means siding with the negative side of the ambivalence, or siding with not changing. You would make a statement such as, perhaps what you're doing is so important to you that you won't give it up no matter what the cost. This allows the client to reject that extreme idea and move more into change talk. There are a number of traps that we can fall into that weaken the effectiveness of motivational interviewing. These traps can either develop because of bad habits that we fall into as case managers, or sometimes our client will lead us to the trap because that makes us work harder than they do. It takes the focus away from them. The first of the traps is the question trap. This sets the expectation that the case manager will ask questions and the client will answer them. What happens here is it makes the client passive. Asking open-ended questions, making space for the client to talk, and using reflective listening are strategies that can be used to avoid this trap. Trap number 2 is called the labeling trap. Diagnostic or other labels represent an obstacle to change. It is best to avoid problem labels and refocus attention when they arrive. For example, labels are not important. You are important, and I'd like to hear more about you. Number 3 is the premature focus trap. When a case manager persists in talking about his or her own conception of the problem, and the client has different concerns, the case manager gets trapped and loses touch with the client. To avoid this, always start with the client's concerns rather than your own assessment of the problem. Later on, the client's concerns may lead to your original belief about the situation. Number 4 is called the taking sides trap. When you detect some information indicating the presence of a problem and begin to tell the client about how serious it is and what to do about it, you've taken sides. This may elicit resistance from the client, and as you argue your view, the client may argue their side. When we experience resistance, when we experience ourselves arguing with our clients, we are likely to have fallen into the taking sides trap. Number 5, the blaming trap. Some clients show defensiveness by blaming others for their situation. It is important to diffuse blaming by explaining to the client that blaming is not the purpose of case management. For example, who is to blame is not as important as your concerns about the situation. And finally, number 6, the expert trap. When you offer advice or give the impression that you are the expert, the client often responds by becoming passive. In motivational interviewing, the client is always the expert about his or her situation, values, goals, concerns, and skills. In motivational interviewing, case managers collaborate with the client and offer them an opportunity to explore and resolve ambivalence about change. If you would like to learn more about motivational interviewing, one of the best books that I have found is a book published by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration called Enhancing Motivation for Change. It was actually written by a committee put together by SAMHSA, and it was chaired by William Miller, the original author of Motivational Interviewing. I have found it to be a clear and structured presentation of motivational interviewing, detailing when to use it, how to use it, and when to use the techniques that are described in motivational interviewing. I've used it to train practitioners for nearly 10 years. You can find a copy of this book as a PDF in the files that are listed in the lesson media section of this lesson.